But the feedback loop is a lot more than what it seems to be. And it plays a role into autism. So let's call this video number 1, and this will be the video in which I describe the feedback loop. But I'll also give you the next chapters, at least a few of them. One will describe schismogenesis. One will describe why schismogenesis provokes autism. One will describe how the different symptoms in autism come about, how they feed into each other. Another will describe particular symptoms so that you could see what variables feed into them, which variables they feed out into. Another one will describe the role that parents play. Yes, they play a role. I said it. I know it's controversial, but this is the truth, and you're going to want to hear it, because what's happening to the autistic child is happening to the parent too. I'll give something away and say that this is a mutual causal process. This is a back and forth process. It's affecting more than one person. Then I guess I'll make a video in relation to how autism feeds into other conditions that are less common but also exist. And in order for these conditions to exist, they first have to traverse through the loops that make up autism. And those are schizophrenia, psychopathy, sociopathy, bipolarity. So those are the ones I'll get into. We'll explore how it is that those symptoms then can develop into those things, and that's rare. So you get combinations, and they all function on spectrums, and we'll get into that. But and you can make sense of any of that, you really have to understand what the feedback loop is. So feedback is always a give and take process. So I can't move this finger without this other finger pushing back. It doesn't have to be a push, but something has to happen back. They have to feed into each other. So all I'm saying is that all feedback loops cycle. There are no linear causes and effects. Everything is cyclical. So then we start playing with the concept of linearity, which gets into infinity and all sorts of things. So let me lay out the biggest claim first. It is the theory of some portion of physicists that reality is structured or made up of vibrating strings. Now, it's my view that they're not too far off. In fact, they're super close. And it's not strings that they're perceiving through their numbers. It's in fact cycles, feedback loop cycles. And feedback loop cycles always intersect with other feedback loop cycles. So they share variables, is what I'm saying. And this arrangement is such that every variable in every feedback loop is itself a feedback loop with its own variable, which themselves are feedback loops. So that is ad infinitum. So like every whole has its parts, every part is a whole with its own parts, and that goes on forever. So this is how it works too with the feedback loop cycles. They're connected throughout infinity, and they come in all sizes and scales and dimensions. This is non-stop. This is infinite in every direction. Every single feedback loop is an infinite system. So you yourself are made of an infinite combination of feedback loops, some which are so organized that they give you structure in relation to other feedback loops, and than you interact with, like people, like objects, like whatever you want to call it. Versus other feedback loops which are more abstract in nature, like the pattern that you followed to work today or to school. You do that every day, let's say, as many times as you do. And those cycles, what I'm saying, are in another dimension, their own particle, with their own properties. But we also see properties of every cycle within our own dimension. So you see it throughout every dimension, affected differently. And this scales through infinity so that you get an arrangement like this. Let me get you a pencil. I had it in my pocket. All right, hold on. What? I'm going to keep talking as I do this, and we'll see what I come up with. So, what I'm saying is this. When you get I'm just going to write points because I'm not going to attempt to draw like little cycles, but imagine every point is a cycle, okay? And you'll see spaces between it. There shouldn't be, because these systems are infinite. So feedback loops, you can imagine them as Venn diagrams where all variables intersect through one Venn diagram or another, but they all play cause and effect to each other. So this would be like just scaled. Hold on, I think that I left the refrigerator open. It's making a sound, but I'm not going to tend to it. All right. So this is, I'm trying to not mess this drawing up. So the ones that you see inside, you can imagine them as 3D loops. Alright? So I'm showing you basically the nature of reality. This is what it looks like. Now imagine that where the points are infinitely connected. So you see what I tried to do here is that this loop connects with this one. You see how they're different sizes? And they all do different things. And they don't all look so precisely circular. I'm just trying to keep things in shape for you so that they will make sense. Though over time they do add up and form what I call, so it's on average. So if you count all the cycles, you know, like if you scribble, you end up with a cycle. So I call those information whirlpools. And information whirlpools is still a relative term for feedback loop, which I should say feedback loop is synonymous with information. Information is feedback loop. They're one and the same. And also infinity, 1 and 0. 1 as the implication of 0, 0 has the implication of 1, right? So that nothing implies something and something implies nothing. And they feed into each other. You see? You see how they feed into each other? It all becomes obvious over time. So you have these intersecting feedback loop cycles, but they're just like all over the place. And there's all sorts of ways in which, let me see this, if I can draw this one, in which the patterns will move into themselves. So imagine like LED lights, where the pattern progresses forward. And this gives the illusion of time. So that, because you can have every variety going in every direction, spreading out like a large, like an endless fade, an endless fade haircut, where every single hair feels like the middle. None of them are, because it's an infinite system, where even the middle folds into itself in all directions. So this is, I mean, I'm just picturing this thing, and it is endless. Like, you can imagine a little bit, like I did here with the scribble, but you have to imagine these cycles being infinite, and all of these Venn diagrams like intersecting with each other in every possible direction and then some. It just never stops. And this is what creates the reality we live in. This is how the simulation of reality works. Now, does that mean that things are not real? Oh, of course they're real. I mean, they're as real for you as they are for anybody else in any other dimension. So you'd be a fool to give up being comfortable, or if you started engaging in doing things that you shouldn't because you felt that you were a game. You are not. You are definitely not a game. That's not what's going on either. So there happens to be the case that the feedback loop is what is going to bring about the future, our increased understanding of it. But the feedback loop at the moment is actually being used to as a weapon of war to try to destroy America internally. So America is under attack by schismogenic forces, let's say. So what does that mean? Because that sounds weird, right? So I think I said I was going to make a video explaining schismogenesis. So that's going to be this one. This will be that one and the feedback loop too. Schismogenesis is a feedback loop that is growing, all right? A feedback loop that grows, it amplifies itself. As this happens over time, what is amplifying is a division between factions. So schismo, which means schism, division, genesis, creation. So the creation of a division. And this division just keeps amplifying itself. It's a feedback loop. So in reality, schismogenesis is a type of deviation amplifying mutual causal process. So there are different examples of deviation amplifying mutual causal processes. Schismogenesis in particular pertains to communication between people. So schismogenesis, so the divisions that are created between people through a deviation amplifying mutual process, which is a feedback loop that's growing. Okay? Now, another example of a deviation amplifying mutual causal process, mutual causal, back and forth. You get other phenomena such as we're all familiar with, the pothole. So potholes, as you know, start with cracks, and as those cracks get filled with water along with the pressure of tires going over the edges of the crack itself, when it gets filled with water, if it gets cold enough, it freezes, which water expands. When it gets cold, it turns into ice, which further cracks the edge, which now you get it, that just goes on and on and on until you get that expansion, you get that feedback loop. Now, schismogenesis is not good, obviously, because what you're getting is an escalation of tensions on both sides. You're getting an escalation of disagreement, an escalation of not being able to see eye to eye. And this is what starts autism, is a schismogenesis that is not noticed, all right? But let's keep talking about schismogenesis without talking about autism yet. So there was a guy in the 1930s whose name is Gregory Bateson. And Gregory Bateson, if you're not familiar, and I wasn't until recently, so I'm not going to act like his autobiographer, but he was an anthropologist, and he's one of the founders of the science of cybernetics. And he discovered schismogenesis. Now, here's the thing. He did this in the 1930s. That was a long time ago. As we know, any natural phenomenon in nature is out there for anyone to discover. So I rediscovered it again. And the way I did it was through exploring my memories and my relationships with people. The way he did it was by exploring the interactions between a tribe he went to study in Papua New Guinea. So he went to go study these people because he wanted to understand how they interacted, right? And there was a ceremony that they would do to celebrate the rite of passage of the young men in the tribe who would make some kind of contribution of note, and this would earn them, it would earn them a good spot with the tribe. They would get a novin. And the novin ritual by itself is its own story. And it involves an uncle, at some point, and it involves the brother of the mother, so the kid's uncle, rubbing his ass cheeks on the kid's shin. This becomes necessary at some point. And it somehow helps things out. Or maybe it's bad, I forget. But, so, in studying their interactions and in studying the ceremony of the novin, he incidentally noticed schismogenesis, what he came to term schismogenesis, which is a deviation, amplify, mutual causal process, or a feedback loop that's growing. And he couldn't look away just like I couldn't. Because I'm telling you, once you notice it, or maybe if you just look too long, at least I think I did. So that I know I started in perceiving the shapes between interactions, and that was weird. That was pretty weird. So because at the time I was doing it, I didn't know, I wasn't familiar with the feedback loop, like I suppose many of you aren't either. I was casually familiar with the feedback loop as in terms of a dog chasing its tail. I was familiar with virtuous and vicious cycles, but even that I didn't connect to the dog thing. So I had passing knowledge, workable knowledge, I think, but I didn't have anything in depth. And there's numbers to crunch in feedback loops that I don't do that. So I'm dealing analog here. So I started perceiving the feedback loop, right, in effect. And it's pretty cool, the things it does. And the way it does them. It's so a really self-driven process all around, so that our definition of life has to drastically be reconsidered. I will tell you this, there is no death. Death is not an actual state. Death is the absence of a state. Because feedback loops can be dissolved, all sorts of things can happen. But it's, I guess what I'm saying, it's not a place. Because the places get created by the feedback loops themselves. So it's not. Unless, I guess, that's what the abyss is, I don't know. Well, anyways, let's not get too sidetracked. But the feedback loop, when he saw it, he noticed it was doing something that I don't think a lot of people are aware of, and they should be. And it's the effect it was having on the mental states of the people who were having to deal with it. And meaning, the people that were going through the schismogenesis